Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form, as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown, that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them, and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly, for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without, and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice, by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone, for the tenure of their offices, and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices, and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people, and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies, without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our constitution, and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. For protecting them, by a mock trial, from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. For imposing taxes on us without our consent. For depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offences. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighbouring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries, so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. For suspending our own legislatures, and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here, by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is, at this time, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction, of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince, whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity, which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name, and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them, and the state of Great Britain, is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, With a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Constitution Zoo. I hope you enjoyed my intro with the Declaration of Independence. I have a few special guests for you today I hope you all will enjoy. My first guest is one of the 5 drafters of Declaration of Independence, like myself. A man that always took a stand for the freedoms of America. Please welcome Roger Sherman.
Hello Ben, and hello audience. Thank you for having me as a guest. Well, since Benjamin hogged reciting the Declaration of Independence all to himself, I guess I will simply remind everyone of how glorious it is to be free. Freedom is not free. It took us years to break free from Great Britain and the powerful hold King George had on Americans. It cost many, many lives along the way. Sad will be the day when the American people forget their traditions and their history, and so longer remember that the country they love, the institutions they cherish, and the freedom they hope to preserve, were born from the throes of armed resistance to tyranny, and nursed in the rugged arms of fearless men. Please, do not, ever forget that. Thank you all.
Thank you, Roger, for those very meaningful and important words. It is very important that we all remember the history of America. History is just that, history. If we do not leave history as is, it will no longer exist in the future, and generations to come will have no history to learn from. Therefore, the same mistakes could be repeated. We as a country have learned by our mistakes over the years. Some have taken longer than others, but we have learned nonetheless. My next guest is also one of the drafters of the Declaration of Independence. He, however, was not able to sign it, as he had to return to his home state of New York before he could give his John Hancock. Please welcome the Chancellor, Robert Livingston. Good to see you again, Cato.
Thank you, Benjamin, for inviting me on the Constitution Zoo. I have heard a lot of great things about this show and the history you are teaching people. Like you said, it is important that our history is discussed often and that the United States Constitution is remembered and followed by everyone, especially the government. Otherwise, America will revert back to the tyrannical control it once was under Great Britain's rule. I am proud to have been one of 5 that helped draft the Declaration of Independence. I am sad that I did not get to sign one of the most important documents in American history, though. I led a very busy life with my law and political career. I practiced law for many years, and then I became chancellor in New York. Not sure if you knew this, but I administered the presidential oath of office to George Washington. Yes, that was a very proud moment in my life. President Jefferson later appointed me to resident minister at the court of Napoleon. I was then ordered to negotiate with French Minister Charles Maurice de Talleyrand for the purchase of New Orleans. To my surprise, the French wanted America to purchase all of Louisiana territory. So in December of 1803, the United States purchased Louisiana and gained 828,000 square miles of land. This was quite an accomplishment for Thomas Jefferson. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little bit of history. It is good to know how the United States was formed. Do some more research and learn even more. There is always so much more history out there.
That was a nice purchase the United States made. Louisiana has quite a lot of history there to tell, indeed. My next guest needs no introduction at all. Please welcome Mr. John Adams.
Hello and good day, everyone. Thank you for having me on as a guest, Ben. You know I always have a lot to say. I, like you and your previous guests, also took part in drafting the Declaration of Independence. I always considered myself to be a very patriotic man. One who always believed in a free America. In May of 1776, I offered a resolution that amounted to a Declaration of Independence from Great Britain. I was shortly thereafter a fierce advocate for the declaration drafted by mostly Thomas Jefferson. The 4th of July is to be celebrated with patriotism and dignity. As I wrote to my beloved wife, Abigail, during one of my many trips to France. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated, by succeeding generations, as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated, as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other from this time forward forevermore. You will think me transported with enthusiasm, but I am not. I am well aware of the toil and blood and treasure that it will cost us to maintain this declaration, and support and defend these states. Yet through all the gloom I can see the rays of ravishing light and glory. I can see that the end is more than worth all the means, and that posterity will triumph in that day's transaction, even although we should rue it. Which I trust in God we shall not. Posterity. You will never know how much it costs the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make a good use of it. Please always remember that, dear audience.
America's Declaration of Independence from the British Empire was the nation's founding moment. But it was not inevitable. Until the spring of 1776, most colonists believed that the British Empire offered its citizens freedom and provided them protection and opportunity. Oh, and thank you, Ben, for having me on your show. I was so excited to get started I just rushed in. Nothing excites me more than speaking of America breaking away from Great Britain. So, I shall continue. The mother country purchased colonists' goods, defended them from Native American, Indian and European aggressors, and extended British rights and liberty to colonists. In return, colonists traded primarily with Britain, obeyed British laws and customs, and pledged their loyalty to the British Crown. Then came along the 7 Years' War. Great Britain began to see a large amount of debt occur, and decided to tax the American colonies to make up for the deficit. And tax they did. There was the Stamp Act of 1765, the Townshend Duties of 1766 and the Tea Act of 1773. The colonists began to see that this was tyranny and political control. Parliament supported increasingly oppressive measures, to force colonists to obey the new laws. Tensions became increasingly heavy and shots were fired between the British troops and colonial militia at Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775. Still, a majority of colonists wanted to remain British. It wasn't until King George did not address the colonists' complaints against Parliament or discuss the possibility of a compromise that they began to change their minds. Then Thomas Paine released a pamphlet titled Common Sense, and more colonists began to consider independence. In June of 1776, the Continental Congress nominated the Committee of Five to draft the Declaration of Independence. Because of my wonderful writing skills, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and John Adams allowed me to draft most the Declaration of Independence, one of 3 of the most important documents ever to be drafted and ratified in the United States of America. Now, just because this document had allowed America to break free from Great Britain, this did not mean it was a downhill battle from that point on. Wars were still fought, lives were still lost, and blood still shed. All of that, my friends, was fought to protect your freedoms. So do not take it lightly. With that being said, I must add, the God who gave us life, gave us liberty at the same time. For liberty and freedom. God bless America.
Well, thank you everyone, for coming by today. I greatly appreciate each of you sharing your stories with the audience. As I have stated before, it is very important that the history of America is forever taught to everyone. We cannot make progress as a nation if we erase history. Remember to subscribe, like and share the Constitution Zoo. Until next time, my loyal liberty-loving fans.